Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How should we view the Maoists and how should we respond to them? That's the key issue I shall explore today with Congress General Secretary and former Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, Digvijay Singh. Mr. Digvijay Singh, let's start with how you view the Maoists. In your recent Economic Times article, you write, the Maoists are at the most misguided ideologues who have lost faith in the system. Let me begin by asking you, what exactly do you mean?
You see, if you go back the history of Communist Party in that part of region, which is Telangana, their movement was in 30s and 40s extremely strong against the Zamindars and of the Nizam, old Hyderabad. And this thing has continued throughout. Of course, the Naxalites brought the name now from Naxalbari, which was later. Basically, these are the people who have sort of formed their opinions and ideological convictions on communism and by the success of Mao Zedong in China, when he said that the power flows to the barrel of the gun. So at the most, these are the people who have sort of, who are convinced that from a democratic system, they cannot get anything.
Let me ask you a few critical questions to understand your position. First of all, do you, Digvijay Singh, view the Maoists as enemies of the state of India?
Well, let me tell you one thing. They are certainly, they certainly do not believe in the democratic system in this country.
But enemies of India?
Well, can't say enemies of India.
Can't say enemies of India.
No.
Do you believe that they are the single biggest security challenge to the Indian state?
They are. Certainly a security threat. But I would not say that they are the first or the second or third. They are definitely a threat to the internal security of this country. And we have to tackle them in a way that we win back the people of that area. And ultimately, it is the will of the people which matters. And in Chhattisgarh, if you don't have the people on your side in that area, whether Chhattisgarh or Andhra Pradesh or Maharashtra or Orissa, you won't be able to tackle the next.
But you're making it clear that although they're a security threat, they're not the single biggest.
Well, you see, this is an assessment of the government. I'm not a part of the government. I'm in the organization. I don't really know the threat perceptions at every level.
Would you also say that they are, in fact, a greater threat to India than militancy in Jammu and Kashmir and the Northeast?
Well, I think it is quite relative. I would not like to comment on that.
The reason I put those two quotations to you is those are the terms that the Prime Minister uses.
The issues are quite different. The one is our Indian people who have sort of have their own ideas about democracy, governance, and there are others in Jammu Kashmir. The people outside the country, people from outside, have been agitating, have been sort of spearheading the cross-border terrorism.
So it's not fair to compare the Maoists to the militants in Jammu and Kashmir.
The issues are quite different.
The issues are different, therefore they're not comparable.
Absolutely.
Let's come to some specific aspects of the Maoists before we come to the question of how we should respond and tackle them. To begin with, how do you respond to their rhetoric? They look upon the Parliament of India as a pigsty. They call India's democracy and elections a sham. Most importantly of all, they want to overturn India's political system.
Well, that is totally unacceptable.
Totally unacceptable.
Yes.
What about the fact that they are seeking to do this, to change the political system, not by winning elections, not by persuading people, but by resort to armed liberation struggle?
That is totally unacceptable.
Thirdly, what about their strategy? They don't just loot banks, they blow up railway lines, they bomb bridges, they demolish telecom towers. Sometimes, worst of all, they believe in what they call annihilation.
This is what I'm saying. This country cannot tolerate this kind of violence. We cannot succumb to this kind of violence. But the key issue is, how do you tackle it? I'm not a great supporter of Naxalites.
I'll come to the tackling in a moment, but I just want to clarify that in terms of their rhetoric, in terms of their goal of overthrowing the political system, in terms of their strategy, all three for you are unacceptable.
Absolutely unacceptable.
So when incidents like the massacre in cold blood of 76 CRPF Jawans in Dantewada happened in April, or in fact on the 8th of May, when 8 further soldiers were blown up in a landmine, how do you view that sort of development?
You see, the issue is, how do you tackle this problem? Today, unfortunately, the people living in that area have totally sort of been marginalized and are totally at the mercy of the Naxalites.
I'll come to the tackling in a moment. Let me just press you. How do you view such things as the Dantewada massacre first?
Well, it is deplorable, condemnable in the highest terms.
But then, given that you don't agree with their rhetoric, with their goal, with their strategies, given that you think Dantewada is deplorable, what do you say to people who turn around and say that when Digvijay Singh calls the Maoists misguided ideologues,
absolutely,
that's minimizing, if not whitewashing them?
You see, I would again go back to my article. You see, when you have this problem, you have to tackle it not in a single-pronged strategy. It has to be multi-pronged. Now, we have an experience of Andhra Pradesh, where they had peace talks with these people. They sort of flagged the issues which were to be which were pro-poor, and after that, when the talks broke down on the simple issue of laying down the arms, the Congress Party government under YSR, they aggressively implemented the pro-poor policies, number one. At the same time, the Congress Party took, Dr. Keshav Rao, the PCC president, took out a long padyatra in those areas, and then they closely targeted the leadership, which was amongst the Naxalites also, among the Maoists also. They are not all of them of the single mindset.
I will come in detail to how one tackles it, but the reason I keep coming back to how you view it is because if you only view them as misguided ideologues, a term that people see as a euphemism, a term that people believe actually whitewashes their crime, then they first question whether you see them as a sufficiently serious threat. That's why I'm insisting on your definition of them and your view of them.
Karan, no one can defend their criminal activities.
But if you only call them misguided ideologues, then aren't you minimizing?
But they are not terrorists. They are, in fact, those people who have committed acts of crime which have to be dealt firmly and decisively. At the same time, you can't sort of equate them with cross-border terrorists.
But you said a moment ago that the Maoists are not terrorists, yet they terrorize people and they use terror as a means to further their goal and ambition.
See, the image of a terrorist in this country is of those who have been coming from the other side.
But there are other types of terrorists. You don't have to be just a Kashmiri terrorist to be a terrorist.
No, at the same time, you have to take into the account that what are the issues. They are demanding greater rights for the people living in those areas.
So the issues, in a sense, qualify for you how you view them. In other words, because you believe that issues have justification, you view them as misguided ideologues, not as terrorists.
I have no quarrel as far as the issues are concerned. They are genuine, they are very fine issues, they are relevant issues. Ultimately, it is the people who matter. But the point is, their strategy, their methods is totally condemnable and not acceptable at all.
So just to sum up this particular point, you insist on seeing them as misguided ideologues, not as terrorists.
They are certainly not terrorists.
Misguided ideologues is your preferred way of seeing them.
Absolutely.
Mr. Digvijay Singh, let's take a break there. I want to come back and ask you how we should tackle the Maoists. That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate with the Congress General Secretary and former Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, Digvijay Singh. Let's then come to the subject that I know you want to talk about, how the Maoist problem should be tackled. Now, once again, in your Economic Times article, you write, we cannot solve it by ignoring the hopes and aspirations of the people living in these areas. So let me first ask you, in what way are their hopes and aspirations being ignored?
See, I would go back to this, that in the Indian Constitution, we start "we the people." After that, in the last 65 years, the greatest change that Mr. Rajiv Gandhi brought in was when he empowered the people with the 73rd and 74th Amendment.
The Panchayat Act.
Absolutely. After that, the second point when it came to this issue of empowerment, it was the Panchayat Extension Schedule areas which was passed during...
PESA, as they call it.
PESA is called. Number 3, when Mrs. Sonia Gandhi brought in the Right to Information Act, ultimately it is the people who matter. In this case, in an earlier article, Economic Times, I had listed 4 issues. Number 1, right of the forest of the tribals.
Number two?
Number two, change in the Mining Regulation Act so that the land houseties get a share of the royalty. Number three, amendment in the Land Acquisition Act.
And four?
And number four, implementation of Panchayat extension in scheduled areas.
Now, when you say that their hopes and aspirations are being ignored, are you suggesting that measures that would give them development, that would give them welfare, such as MNREGA, the National Rural Health Mission, or forest policies or mining policies, are not being implemented, that they are being denied the benefit that would happen if they were implemented? Is that what you're saying?
You see, there are the four issues which I have listed. The fourth can be implemented without any change in the act.
But it's not happening.
It's not happening because the lack of political will of the state government.
Does lack of political will also mean that MNREGA or the National Rural Health Mission, these are things you mentioned in your Economic Times articles,
yes,
that these are not being implemented?
You see, again, I would like to go back to my article. The Government of India schemes are not being implemented earnestly because the money that is going there is being taken away either by the employees or by the Naxalites.
So the development that should go, that should give welfare to the poor tribals who live in these areas,
yes,
is not happening.
Is not happening.
As a result of which you say their hopes and aspirations are ignored.
Absolutely.
Is it then your position that the first step in tackling the Maoists is to tackle the development and the welfare of the poor tribals who live in Maoist areas?
You see, it can't be seen in isolation. All things have to be tackled together. Like I said, in the Andhra Pradesh experience, we implement the pro-poor policies. Then the political parties have to go to the people, have to convey to the people. Number three, at the same time, you have to then identify all those Maoist leadership who are totally sort of a view of the extremism. And therefore, we have to talk to such people who are not really so, don't have such extreme views.
The interesting thing in your priority is that identifying the Maoists who are extremists was put by you as number three. Mr. Chidambaram says that in fact militarily defeating the Maoists has to be the first stage. Otherwise, you don't have access to the areas they control. You can't implement development.
Karan, I'm very happy that Honorable Prime Minister and Chidambaram ji himself have accepted this, that we can't send army, we can't send air force, and we can't defeat them militarily.
But they are talking about sending in the paramilitary, they're talking about sending in armed police, and they say that defeating the Maoists militarily has to be the first stage, development follows. You've put it the other way around.
Karan, I'm not saying one precedes the other.
You're saying together?
It has to be together.
But they are saying one precedes the other.
No, you are not right. Honorable Prime Minister himself told me it has to be a multi-pronged strategy implemented together, and so has Chidambaram ji told me.
Well, you say Chidambaram ji has told you that, but in your article you say, I have differed with his strategy that does not take into account consideration of the people living in the affected areas who ultimately matter. He's treating it as a purely law and order problem without taking into consideration the issues that affect the tribals.
This is pre-article. I'm talking of post-article.
So after this article was written, in other words, after the 14th of April, he's given you an assurance that, like you, he believes that the two things, militarily tackling the Maoists and development and welfare for the tribals who live in those areas, both have to happen together.
This has been reflected in his speeches later on.
So have you been influential in changing his position?
No, I don't claim that credit.
You don't claim that credit, but do you think you deserve the credit?
But I think there is a perceptible change in thinking now, because in the Parliament debate also, most of the members of Parliament took this line of
I want to get you to repeat that because I think it's so important. There is a perceptible change in the thinking of Mr. Chidambaram.
Well, in what he has spoken after the debate has come through.
And would you then go so far as to say, even if you don't want to claim credit and be immodest, that he has at least been influenced by your article and the line of advocacy that you take there?
Well, I would not claim that credit again. It is for you to see.
All right. That I think is sufficient for me. Let me put something else to you. In your article you write that when you first raised with Mr. Chidambaram the fact that his strategy was actually ignoring the development of the poor tribals who live in Maoist-dominated areas, at that time he said to you it was not his responsibility.
How surprised were you by that earlier? No, when I gave him my article, which I wrote in the Economic Times earlier, which had flagged four of these issues, the right of the forest.
And we know the issues.
Yeah.
When you gave him the article, what did he say?
So he said, this you'll have to talk to the Prime Minister because I can't take this into. I can't handle it.
At that point of time, he said, talk to the Prime Minister. It's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
But since then, he's clearly changed his position and he's decided that the two tracks have to go together.
Well, this is what I have noticed in his speeches later on, and of course the parliamentary debate also, most of the members of parliament thought this way.
Now, in fact, in your article, you go one step further. You say that to the extent it is essential to militarily tackle the Maoists, you believe that this has to be done by recruiting a battalion of tribals from the area. You say that the CRPF cannot be effective in that terrain. Why do you say that?
I'm very surprised, Karan. Why only CRPF has been targeted by Naxalites? First Dantewada, then Bijapur. Where is the Chhattisgarh police? Where are they? The intelligence gathering has to be by the local police, by the local people. Where is the intelligence coming from?
The CRPF.
Why CRPF is being led into all this?
So as outsiders, the CRPF is not equipped to have intelligence gathering effectively done.
They are trained differently. CRPF basically is a force which has been trained differently. But here you see it has to be, policing is quite different from the function of the CRPF.
This is why you believe that a locally recruited battalion of tribals themselves is the best way of fighting.
Absolutely. And this by which they will be able to give you the right kind of information. The terrain, Karan, let me tell you, the terrain is such. 2 helicopters crashed last year. One debris was found after 27 days. The other debris was found after 45 days.
I accept your point. When you put this second suggestion, particularly about recruiting a battalion of tribals locally to Mr. Chidambaram,
no, I have not discussed this with him.
Don't you think you should?
Well, this is what they should look at.
They should look at it. So you believe that this is still the right way and Mr. Chidambaram should look at it?
You see, until you win over the people in that area, you will neither get intelligence, nor would you know the terrain, and nor would you be able to fight these
So in other words, what you're saying, and I'm summing up this section of the interview with this point, is that there is need for a fairly substantial rethinking of the Home Ministry's approach. Some of that rethinking has already happened, as you've indicated, but they need to rethink further in terms of the sort of troops and how those troops are recruited for fighting the Maoists. You're nodding, is that yes?
See, I would again go back to Salwa Judum. Salwa Judum was a very honest effort by the tribals who had been victimized by the Naxalite to fight the Naxalite. Unfortunately, these people were brought out of their homestead, from their villages, and brought to relief camps, which was the biggest blunder which the Chhattisgarh government could make. And now they have made the total refugees. They have given away the space to the tribals, to the Naxalites.
Another type of Salwa Judum by recruiting local tribals and creating battalions and then using them.
I would not call them Salwa Judum.
But you call them another name.
You see, what I'm trying to say is, until and unless you have people in the forces who know the terrain, who know the language, who know the culture, it will be very difficult to fight these Naxalites.
My last point to you. Clearly today, there is a greater measure of agreement between your views and Mr. Chidambaram's than there was when your article was written on the 14th of April, although even now there are some significant differences. In view of that, would you like to reconsider or withdraw the comments you made about him? You said in that article that he's extremely rigid once he makes up his mind. You also said that he's treated you with intellectual arrogance on many occasions. Would you like to withdraw or reconsider those?
Well, if it has hurt him, I'm prepared to say sorry and withdraw my remarks.
You are actually prepared to use the word sorry?
If he's hurt, naturally he's a friend of mine, we work together, and I would not like to hurt his feelings.
And if you were to say sorry...
I had made an honest comment which I thought I should, but if it has hurt him deeply, I'm sorry.
Mr. Digvijay Singh, a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure.